All right, guys. So right now what I'm going to do is I want to hop in and show you guys a little bit more information about aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. What we're going to do is we're going to be using the 5D Mark III interface, and I'm going to show you guys what the interface looks like on the inside and just talk a little bit about what you're going to be seeing. So that way when you see this information on your camera, you're going to know what it is. And this information is going to be similar on all cameras because they're all going to be using the similar type of information. So let's go ahead and hop on in and I'll talk about it a little bit further. So to begin here, what we're looking at is a bunch of information, and don't worry about it. Don't be intimidated. It's going to all make sense very shortly. So to begin, we have on the left here that 40. That represents the actual shutter speed that's going on in the camera. The second is 2.8. That represents the aperture. We talked about that a little bit. And this in the middle is the exposure. This lets you know how many stops of exposure to the left or to the right. This is the photos, the photo area, how many photos you have left to shoot. And the last thing is the ISO. We talked about the ISO, the sensitivity of the sensor. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and show you guys what's going on when I make changes to the aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, and it'll help you understand how the image changes. So you see here, what I did right here is I changed the aperture to f11. You see how it got much darker? That's because the aperture is smaller, the hole is smaller, less light's coming in. And what happened here is that we increased the ISO to 800, so it's more sensitive to light. So you see here, if we increase it even more, it'll be even more sensitive to light. And so right here, what you can see is that it's properly exposed again. What I'm going to be doing is just going to try to get everything properly exposed over time. So you see that the dial how in the middle, it says it's showing it at even. That's kind of going to be the focal point of how we do things. So in order for me to make it even at F11, I had to increase the ISO to 2500. So if I go ahead and change the ISO, let's say to 12,800, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to make sure that everything's balanced right now. So you know, increasing the aperture to something like f20, 25. And so what I want you to see here is the noise. Do you see all little dots moving around in the frame? The noise in the image? It's because the ISO is so sensitive that it's picking up everything. And this is what I want you guys to talk to you guys about, is that when you increase the ISO, the image is going to be degraded. It's going to be a lower quality image. This is why you always want to use the lowest possible ISO possible when taking your photos. So at 12,800, you can see that the photo is going to be not much more noisy when you take it. And what I'm doing this in video is showing you the exact same thing that your photo is going to look like. It's very similar to what your photo is going to look like. So it's just important for you to understand how that's going to differentiate when you increase the ISO. And now what I want to do is I'm going to decrease the aperture. So the aperture is going to be wider, more light's coming in. And I'm going to decrease the ISO. And I want you guys to let me know what you think is going to happen. So decreasing the ISO to 400 and then the aperture to f4. This is the same balanced picture, but look at the noise levels now in the image. There's so much less noise in the image because we brought the ISO down to 400 versus 12,800. And this is what I really want you guys to see. And so right now we're still one stop exposed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the ISO even more to make it more even, close to even. And look at that, even less noise. Look at how crisp it looks now in comparison with the other image at high ISO. Another big thing I want you guys to pay attention to is the background. Check out how the background looks different at f2.8 versus f25. You notice how creamy the background is? That's what you're getting when you have that f2.8 versus that versus the f25. And here, what I'm going to show you guys is at ISO 800 and at 320. If you notice how the light looks different now, see how the light looks a little bit sharper from the candle? It's because you're at 320, so it's a sharper image. So at f2.8, you have the shallow depth of field. At 320, at the shutter speed at 1/320th of a second, you have a sharper light that you can see. And at ISO 800, you have a lot less noise in the image. So here we go at ISO 1600. And what I want you guys to see here is just look at this at f8. If you notice at f8, the background plant is more in focus than it was at f2.8 because the aperture is smaller, right? The hole is smaller, and at ISO 1600, there's going to be more noise because the sensor is more sensitive. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about these three things, right? Aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, and how you're going to frame your image. And I want you guys to practice on using all three of these things in order to craft different types of images.